How does one coffee shop defeat an empire? In the mid-20th century, a handful of companies controlled half the American coffee market. You probably couldn't name a single one of them today. The company that eventually beat them wasn't a bigger rival. It was a tiny shop that opened its doors in 1971 without even a proper cash register. It didn't dare call itself a coffee house, and its own founders almost killed its one shot at becoming anything more. The empire was real. In post-war America, Maxwell House, Folgers, and Nestle together controlled nearly half the country's coffee market. Their weapon was simple: instant coffee, giant tin cans, the best shelf space in every supermarket, and advertising everywhere you looked. Americans didn't drink coffee for the taste. They drank it out of habit. Cheap, fast, forgettable, like drinking a glass of warm water. But at the height of this empire's power, a warning sign appeared that nobody took seriously. In the 1960s, the average American drank 3 cups of coffee a day. By the mid-1980s, that number had fallen to less than 2. Nearly half of American adults didn't drink coffee at all. An empire big enough to dominate half a market held the shelves, the pricing, the distribution, and still couldn't hold on to people's hearts. That was the first crack in the empire, and no one noticed it. In 1971, the other main character in this story showed up, though nothing about it looked like a threat. In Seattle, 3 friends who'd met as college students, Gordon Bowker, Jerry Baldwin, and a young man named Zev Siegel, opened a small store called Starbucks. The reason was almost embarrassingly simple. Bowker couldn't find a decent cup of coffee anywhere in Seattle, and he'd been driving all the way to Vancouver just to buy good beans. So the 3 of them figured, why not just open a shop of their own back home? There were no chairs, no lattes, no cappuccinos. Just a handful of carefully chosen coffee beans, sold to a small circle of stubborn coffee lovers. Nobody would have connected this shop to the idea of defeating an empire. In 1980, Siegel sold his stake and left the company. The real turning point came from an accident that was never supposed to happen. In 1982, a young man named Howard Schultz joined the little shop to run marketing and retail. The following year, the company sent him on a business trip to Milan, Italy for a housewares trade show. He'd only gone there to talk business, but the moment he stepped out of his hotel, something stopped him in his tracks. Milan alone had more than 1,500 coffee bars. People weren't grabbing a cup and rushing off. They were standing at the counter, chatting with strangers, exchanging a few words with the owner, nursing a single espresso for half an hour. Schultz suddenly understood something. Those American coffee empires were selling a caffeinated liquid. What these Italians were selling was something else entirely. A place that belonged neither to home nor to work. Somewhere you could sit down, read the paper, meet a friend, talk business, and nobody would ever rush you out the door. Later, this idea would get a name: The Third Place. The story almost ended right here. Schultz flew back to Seattle, buzzing with the idea, and pitched it to the founders. Starbucks should be a coffee house, not just a bean shop. The 2 remaining founders said no to them. Running a cafe wasn't a real business. Schultz didn't give up. He did something riskier instead. He struck out on his own. In 1985, he left Starbucks and with borrowed money, opened his own coffee bar chain called Il Giornale. Almost nobody believed in him, an industry that giant conglomerates had ruled for decades. What chance did one small shop have of shaking any of it up? Nobody saw what happened next coming. 2 years later, the original founders decided to sell Starbucks. Schultz bought the very brand that had once turned him down for $3.8 million and folded his own coffee bar chain into it. For the first time, the name Starbucks became attached to the cafe experience it's known for today. This is the twist in the story that's easiest to miss. Starbucks came within one rejection of staying a small bean shop forever. What followed happened at a startling pace. In 4 years, the store count went from fewer than 20 to over 100. In June 1992, Starbucks went public on the NASDAQ under the ticker SBUX at $17 a share. In 1996, It started expanding beyond North America. By the end of the decade, it had more than 2,500 stores across a dozen countries, and the stock had climbed past $100 a share. Meanwhile, the old coffee empires, built on supermarket shelves, mass production, and non-stop advertising, never grasped a business built around opening physical cafes, training baristas, and selling an in-person experience. It simply wasn't part of how they thought about the business. Nobody noticed a brand new category quietly growing underneath them: the American specialty coffee market, which went from $45 million in 1969 to $2 billion by 1994. There's a line from the Tao Te Ching that captures this moment well. Reversal is the movement of the way, meaning that when something reaches its extreme, it tends to swing in the opposite direction. The empires that had ruled for decades on instant coffee never imagined that what would eventually beat them wasn't a cheaper rival playing the same game. It was a competitor operating by an entirely different set of rules. Just when everyone assumed this comeback story was finished, the real crisis was only beginning. In 2000, Schultz stepped down as CEO, though he never really left. He stayed on as chairman. The two CEOs who followed him kept pushing Starbucks into aggressive expansion. Store count went from 3,500 in 2000 to more than 16,000 by the end of 2007. But the cost of that growth showed up at the same time. 3 or 4 company-owned stores would open on the same block, cannibalizing each other's customers. Staff training couldn't keep pace with the growth. The third place that once made people want to sit and linger had turned into something closer to a fast food assembly line. Customer complaints piled up, and with the economic downturn that began in 2007, Starbucks stock lost more than 76% of its value between 2006 and 2008, falling to under $5 a share at one point. This time, what nearly broke Starbucks wasn't an outside empire. It was the shape the company had grown into on its own. In January 2008, Schultz took back the CEO position, replacing Jim Donald, who had been running the company. The first thing he did made a lot of people think he'd lost his mind. He shut down every Starbucks store in the United States for an entire day, for one purpose only: retraining baristas on how to pull a proper shot of espresso. Closing for a day meant a massive hit to revenue, but Schultz understood something clearly. What had let Starbucks beat the instant coffee empire in the first place was never scale. It was the human warmth behind that cup of coffee. If growth had cost the company that, then Starbucks had become no different from the empires it once defeated. He went on to close 900 underperforming stores and replaced a large share of the executive team. This wasn't a retreat. It echoes a line from the I Ching: when a thing is exhausted, it changes. Once it changes, it flows again. Open corner bracket. By 2012, Starbucks' finances had fully recovered, and the company reclaimed its place as the largest coffeehouse chain in the world. Looking back at the whole story, what it really defeated was never one specific company. It was an entire mindset, one that put efficiency first and treated people as an afterthought. There's a line in the Tao Te Ching: a tree that fills a man, arms grows from a tiny sprout. Open corner bracket. A single cup of coffee, a place worth sitting down in, a bit of human warmth. These things were once so small, nobody could even see them. Decades later, they grew into a force strong enough to topple an empire. And maybe that's the part of this story most worth remembering. Sometimes, what brings down something enormous, ISN, a bigger opponent? It's something that giant never bothered to look at closely, even once.